The road was a cruel, unblinking eye, baked white by a sun that offered no mercy. It saw everything and remembered nothing. It had seen wagons heavy with hope crawl west and solitary riders fleeing east. It had swallowed the dust of armies and the tears of the lost. Today, it saw two small figures huddled by its edge, no more significant than a pair of discarded stones. They were girls, sisters by the way the taller one shielded the smaller from the wind, though the wind itself was too tired to blow. Their dresses were little more than patched-together rags, the color of the dirt they sat upon. Wagons rumbled past. The faces that glanced their way were hard, shuttered, each one a testament to the brutal arithmetic of survival. 2 more mouths were a burden too great. A man on a fine horse slowed, his gaze lingering with a cold assessment before he spurred his mount onward, leaving a cloud of indifference to settle over them. The girls did not cry out. They did not beg. They simply watched the world pass, their silence a profound and terrible accusation. Then, another rider appeared, a lone silhouette against the shimmering horizon. This one was different. The horse was a sturdy grey, not a proud stallion, and the rider sat not with arrogance, but with a weary stillness, as if molded from the same grief-stricken clay as the landscape. It was a woman. Ilara. The rifle in its scabbard on her saddle was as much a part of her as the lines etched around her eyes. She, too, saw the girls. Her first instinct was the same as the others, to look away. Her homestead was a sanctuary of solitude, a fortress built to keep the world out, to protect the hollow space where a husband and a son used to be. The ghosts in her cabin did not need new company. She urged her horse forward, the steady clip-clop a countdown to leaving them behind forever. The road would claim them. The buzzards would circle. It was the way of things. But then she saw it. The younger girl, whose face was a pale, smudged oval, coughed, a dry, rasping sound that was swallowed by the immense emptiness. The older one instinctively pulled her closer, her small arm a fierce, useless shield. It was that gesture, so futile, so defiant, that broke through the calloused walls of Ilara's heart. It was a memory, sharp and agonizing, of her own hand reaching for a small, feverish one that was already growing cold. The world stopped. The heat, the dust, the endless sky, it all receded. There was only the gesture. Defiance in the face of oblivion. A quiet promise to protect the helpless. Ilara reined in her horse, the animal sighing in relief. For a long moment, she sat, a statue of indecision, the past and the present warring within her. The world had taken everything from her. It owed her nothing. She owed it nothing in return. But the girls were not the world. They were just 2 small souls on a road that had forgotten how to care. Slowly, deliberately, she turned the horse around. The wagons ahead were already shrinking into dots of dust. She was alone with her choice. She rode back, the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears, a drumbeat she had not truly heard in years. She stopped the horse beside them. The older girl looked up, her eyes not filled with hope, but with a guarded, ancient weariness. "Get up," Ilara said. Her voice was rough from disuse, like stones scraping together. The word hung in the air, simple, direct, an order and an offering all at once. The girls did not move, frozen by either fear or disbelief. Ilara dismounted, her boots sinking into the fine powder of the road. She reached down, not for the girls, but for a small, burlap sack tied to her saddle. She untied it and offered it. Inside was a piece of dried meat and a small, hard biscuit. The older girl's eyes darted from Ilara's face to the food, then to her sister. She made a decision. She took the biscuit and broke it in half, giving the larger piece to the little one. Only then did she look back at Ilara. A silent question. A silent plea. Ilara simply nodded toward her horse. There is room, and with that, the world shifted on its axis. The road that had been a line toward an empty future now curved back, leading to a place she had once called home. The cabin was just as she had left it, a monument to methodical grief. The floorboards were swept clean, the single iron pot scrubbed, the woolen blanket on her cot folded with military precision. But it was a dead place, holding its breath, the air thick with the dust of memory. The arrival of the girls was a stone tossed into a stagnant pool. They stood just inside the doorway, blinking in the sudden dimness, bringing with them the scent of the road and a wild, animal fear. The older one, Lena, kept the younger, Maya, tucked behind her, her hand gripping her sister's wrist like an anchor. Elara didn't press them. Words were a currency she had long since stopped trading in. Actions were the only truth. She moved to the stone hearth, her movements economical and sure. She struck flint to steel, coaxing a spark into a flame that caught on the dry kindling. The fire did not just bring light, it breathed life back into the room, its flickering orange tongues painting shifting shadows on the walls, making the silence seem less absolute. She filled the pot with water from the rain barrel and set it over the flames. She tore the dried meat into smaller pieces and dropped them in, the sizzle a startling intrusion. The girls watched every move, their eyes wide and dark. Maya peeked from behind Lena, her gaze fixed on the rifle Elara had propped against the wall by the door. It was a promise of violence and a symbol of safety all at once. Elara saw her look. She said nothing, but her hand, as she reached for a wooden bowl, was steady. She ladled the thin, hot broth into 2 bowls and set them on the rough-hewn table. She gestured for them to sit. Lena hesitated, then guided her sister to the bench. They ate like starving wolves, hunched over the bowls, their small hands shaking. Lena, even in her hunger, paused to make sure Maya was eating, pushing a piece of her own meat into her sister's bowl when she thought Elara wasn't looking. But Elara saw everything. She saw the raw, chapped skin on their hands, the hollows beneath their eyes, the way Lena would flinch whenever a gust of wind rattled the cabin's single window. This was a trauma deeper than mere hunger. Later, as dusk bled across the plains, turning the sky a bruised purple, Elara laid a spare blanket on the floor near the hearth. It was the warmest place in the cabin. Lena led Maya to it without a word. They curled together, a single knot of shared misery and comfort. Elara sat in her chair, watching the firelight play across their sleeping faces. Maya whimpered in her sleep, her small hand clutching a tiny, crudely carved wooden bird, its wings worn smooth from countless nights of fearful gripping. Lena's arm tightened around her. Elara felt a pang in her chest, a ghost of a feeling she had buried long ago. This was not compassion. It was something more dangerous. It was responsibility. She looked at her hands, strong, capable, but empty. For 5 years, they had done nothing but keep one life going. Now, there were 2 more. The silence of the cabin had changed. It was no longer the empty silence of loss, but the heavy, fragile silence of waiting. Waiting for a wound to heal, or for whatever had put them on that road to come looking for them. She rose and bolted the door. It was a simple act, one she performed every night. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like a declaration. The days bled into one another, measured not by the sun, but by the slow, tentative return of life to the 2 small strangers. The harsh, windswept plains around the homestead began to show faint whispers of green, a stubborn life pushing through the cracked earth, and inside the cabin, a similar, fragile thought was beginning. Maya, who for a week had been a silent shadow, finally spoke. "Is it going to rain?" she asked, her voice a tiny, rusty thing. She was looking at the darkening clouds through the window. Elara, who was mending one of Lena's torn sleeves, paused, the needle held midair. The sound of a child's voice in the cabin was so foreign it was almost painful. "Maybe," Elara replied, her own voice still gravelly. "The ground needs it." It was a simple exchange, but it cracked the ice. From then on, small moments began to accumulate like precious water droplets in the desert. Lena, seeing Elara struggle to haul water from the well, took the smaller bucket and began to help, her movements growing more confident with each trip. She learned to anticipate Elara's needs, fetching firewood or stirring the pot without being asked, her watchfulness transforming from fear of a stranger into the careful attention of an apprentice. Elara, in turn, found herself teaching them things she thought she had forgotten. She showed Maya how to find the tough, edible roots that grew near the creek bed and how to tell the difference between a hawk's cry and an eagle's. She took Lena out beyond the small corral and taught her how to read the story written in the dirt, the tracks of a coyote, the path of a deer. During one of these lessons, Lena pointed to a faint set of prints. "A shod horse," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Riding heavy." Ilara looked at her, surprised by the astuteness. "Yes," she confirmed. "From the east." A few days ago Lena's face clouded over, the brief flicker of childhood extinguished. "He rides a shod horse," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the ground. Ilara's protective instinct, now a waking giant, sharpened to a fine point. She did not ask who he was. The fear in Lena's eyes was answer enough. The unspoken threat had a shape. It had a direction. And it was coming. The foreshadowing became a certainty a week later. Ilara was skinning a rabbit on the porch when her old dog, who rarely did more than sleep in the sun, lifted his head and let out a low, guttural growl. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, on the long, empty stretch of road leading to the homestead. Ilara followed his stare. At first, there was nothing. Then, a speck. A dark mote of dust that slowly, inexorably, grew larger. It was a rider. Not a traveler pushing west, but someone moving with a slow, deliberate purpose, as if scanning the landscape. As if searching. The sky, which had been a brilliant, cloudless blue, seemed to pale. The wind picked up, carrying a sudden chill. Ilara dropped the rabbit and wiped her hands on her trousers. She went inside. The girls were by the hearth, Maya tracing patterns in the ash with her wooden bird. Lena saw the look on Ilara's face and her own went white. Ilara walked to the wall and took down the rifle. The weight of it was familiar, a cold, hard comfort. She checked the chamber, her movements fluid and certain. She turned to Lena, her eyes locking with the girls. The time for silence was over. "Who is coming for you?" Lena's breath hitched. She pulled Maya close, her small body trembling. "His name is Silas," she said, the name a poison thing on her tongue. "He says we belong to him." The rider did not approach with the haste of an enemy, but with the slow, entitled swagger of a man coming to collect a debt. He reined his tall black horse to a stop a dozen yards from the cabin, letting the dust settle around him like a shroud. Silas. He was not a monster in form. He was dressed in dark, well-made clothes, his face clean-shaven, a stark contrast to the rough-worn men of the plains. But his eyes were cold chips of slate, and his smile, when he offered one to Ilara, did not touch them. It was a smile that assessed and dismissed all at once. Ilara stood on the porch, the rifle held loosely at her side, its barrel pointed at the earth. She was a silent, unmovable sentinel. "Good day, Silas called out, his voice smooth and confident. He swung down from his horse, his movements easy. "I seem to have lost something. Two somethings, to be precise. Little girls. Scrawny things. I heard a rumor they might have found their way here." He took a step closer, his gaze sweeping over the cabin, the well-tended porch, and finally settling back on Ilara. He saw a woman, alone. A widow, by the look of the place. An easy obstacle. "They are not lost," Ilara said. The words were flat, hard stones dropped into a well. "And they are not things." Silas's smile tightened. He let out a short, condescending laugh. "Ah. A misunderstanding. You see, their father owed me a great deal. When he passed, his debt fell to me. As did his property. The law is quite clear on such matters." He gestured vaguely toward the east, as if invoking a civilization that had no meaning here. The wind whistled through the eaves of the cabin, a low, mournful sound. Inside, Ilara could feel the terrified silence of the two children huddled behind the door. They were her responsibility. A promise she had made to herself on that dusty road. "There is no law out here but what a person carries in their own heart," Ilara stated. "And my heart says they are free." Silas's veneer of civility finally cracked. His face hardened, the false pleasantry falling away to reveal the raw greed beneath. "You are one woman. With one rifle. I am offering you the chance to walk away from this. Give me the girls, and I will be on my way. They are my laborers. My property. You have no claim. He took another step, his hand drifting toward the pistol holstered at his hip. It was not a threat, not yet, but a reminder of the power he believed he held. My claim, Ilara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying with lethal clarity, is that I turned back for them. The statement hung in the air between them, incomprehensible to a man like Silas. He could not understand an action not born of profit or self-interest. He saw it only as foolishness, as weakness. It was the last mistake he would ever make. He saw her as just a woman. He did not see the years of grief forged into resilience. He did not see the ghost of a lost son standing behind her. He did not see the protector she had become. With a sneer, he decided the time for talk was over. His hand dropped to his pistol. But Ilara was not reacting to his movement. She had been waiting for his intent. Her rifle came up, not in a panic, but in a single, fluid motion that was as natural as breathing. The world narrowed to the space between them. The wind died. The sun seemed to hang motionless in the sky. There was the crack of the rifle, sharp and definitive against the vast silence of the plains. It was not a battle. It was an execution. A judgment. Silas crumpled to the ground, a look of pure astonishment on his face, the pistol half drawn from its holster. A dark stain began to spread across the dust. The black horse shied, then bolted, galloping east, a riderless messenger of a failed claim. The silence that followed the rifle shot was heavier than any that had come before. It was a silence of consequence, thick with the scent of gunpowder and the finality of death. Ilara stood on the porch for a long time, the rifle still warm in her hands, its barrel smoking faintly in the cold air. The wind returned, tugging at her hair, beginning its work of erasing the stain from the dust. The world was already forgetting Silas. But inside the cabin, nothing would be forgotten. She lowered the rifle, her movement slow and deliberate. She did not look at the body again. She turned and unlatched the door, stepping back into the dim interior. Lena and Maya were huddled by the cold hearth, clinging to each other. Their faces were pale, their eyes enormous pools of terror and awe. They had heard it all. The smooth, cruel voice. The hard, quiet defiance. The single, deafening shot. No words were spoken. Words had no place in this moment. Ilara walked past them and propped the rifle back in its place against the wall. She knelt at the hearth and began, with steady hands, to build a new fire. The scraping of flint, the soft whisper of kindling catching flame, the eventual crackle of burning wood, these were the sounds that began to push the echo of the gunshot away. She moved about the cabin, resuming the rhythm of the evening. She drew water. She prepared a simple meal. Her actions were a quiet reassurance, a testament to the fact that life, even after this, would go on. The three of them ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. The fear was gone, replaced by a fragile, unspoken understanding. The threat was over. They were safe. Later, as the fire burned low, casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls, Maya approached Ilara. The little girl stood before her for a moment before holding out her small hand. In her palm was the worn wooden bird. She gently placed it in Ilara's hand, a transfer of her most prized possession. It was a gift of trust so profound it left Ilara breathless. Her fingers closed around the smooth, familiar shape. Lena watched them, and for the first time, the fierce, guarded look in her eyes softened into something that resembled peace. A silent pact was sealed in the firelight, a family forged not of blood, but of shared peril and fierce protection. The seasons turned. The harsh, brown landscape gave way to the tender greens of spring. A small patch of earth beside the cabin was tilled and planted, rows of stubborn vegetables pushing toward the sun. The work was shared. Lena's hands grew strong and calloused, Maya's laughter became a common sound, and the lines of grief on Ilara's face were softened by a new purpose. The rifle still hung by the door, a constant reminder of the price of their safety. But it was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of the promise she had made on a lonely road, a promise to turn back. The homestead was no longer a fortress of solitude, but a thriving sanctuary. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they were no longer alone. they had made room for the living. And under the vast, watchful sky, the three of them stood together, a small, defiant island of hope in a world that had taught them to expect none.